Concept of a contemplative life may be most easily associated with life in a monastery, but many people also attempt such a life in the everyday world. Judy Valente looks at the different ways people practice contemplation in the city of Chicago.
The very heart of the contemplative life is an awareness, a constant awareness of God's presence.
To live the contemplative life, to spend one's days seeking God in all things through a life centered on prayer, simplicity, and compassion. Most people think you have to retreat to a place like this Benedictine monastery to live the contemplative life. But more and more people are trying to be contemplative in the city, amid the crowds, noise, and stress of everyday life. Wayne Teasdale is a 56-year-old Chicagoan who earns his living as a writer, teacher, and religious scholar.
What I'm trying to show there, through quantum physics, is that what is reality made of? What is the stuff of reality?
11 years ago, he took voluntary vows of celibacy and simplicity, just as monks do, and decided to lead the life of a lay monk in the world.
I live by those vows, but I also live by a kind of deep commitment to be unconditionally loving and compassionate towards everyone, towards all sentient beings, humans and animals and whatever. I try to practice that sensitivity. That's fundamental.
From boyhood, Teasdale, a Roman Catholic, felt drawn to religious life. He twice entered a monastery with the intention of becoming a priest, but left each time, concluding he could make a bigger contribution living in the outside world.
It's within the sphere of action, of having to earn a living, of having to pay taxes, of having to interact with homeless people and with colleagues that you do or don't get along with, that one can find that connection with God.
Teasdale would like official status and has petitioned the Catholic Church to recognize him as an urban hermit. His hermitage, his refuge, is a rented one-bedroom apartment.
An ordinary hermitage would have almost as much space, though, maybe more. You know, there would be a bedroom, there'd be a kitchen area, there'd be a chapel, usually. Probably what I lack is a garden, so the plants make up for that. I don't own a car, I don't own any property. The only extravagance are my books. I live a kind of simple life.
How can people simplify their lives?
One has to work at it. I mean, it is not part of the American dream. They create these little islands of contemplation in their schedule, in their day. They'll realize that that noise and that confusion, that hustle and bustle isn't the real thing. You know, there's something deeper happening there.
Centering prayer is the focus of Teasdale's life, a meditative prayer, an emptying of the mind in order to become completely open to God.
But deliver us from evil. Amen.
People who want a contemplative life say prayer is essential because it leads to greater compassion. Compassion, they say, leads to service and to change in both their inner lives and in the world. This group, the Friends of Compassion, was looking for greater meaning in their lives. After years of trying to forge a spiritual path on their own, they began meeting together to pray and study sacred texts.
I work as a researcher and a biochemist at the University of Chicago. That's how I make my living. And I make life worth living by teaching different ways of communicating nonviolently.
They are Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, and Jews from a number of professions. A scientist, builder, policeman, lawyers. The group's founder is Brian Muldoon. Once a defense lawyer on the fast track, he is now a divorce mediator who works at home. He was inspired during a trip to India and a meeting with the Dalai Lama.
So when I came back here, I talked to some friends who'd been with us in India and said, what if we made this a part of our everyday lives instead of just having meetings and conferences about it?
The social service aspect of the group includes underwriting the cost of computer link-ups in a village in India. And here, they're meeting to discuss a Chicago project, working with the homeless or trauma victims.
We'd have two anchors for our outreach work. One here in the Chicago community and one in India.
I've seen wonderful miracles and lots of wonderful, wonderful things of love, of compassion, and service. But most important of all, what I have seen is transformation of people.
Individual members of the Friends of Compassion are already engaged in other service projects. Don Fink, who owns a resale shop in suburban Chicago, mentors an inner-city teenager.
12 or
bowls. Since the time I was little, I was involved in packing up people's material possessions at the end of their life. It was clearly as trite as you can't take it with you.
Fink says meditative prayer frequently anchors his business day.
I don't know if I'm ever going to do anything that's going to change the world or change a community. But if I can have effect on one life, as people say, then that's good enough for me.
Deb Pine is also drawn to the contemplative life. As a senior vice president of a large bank, she makes tough business decisions.
Being in finance, in the city is a very stressful thing to be.
A few times a week, she escapes her busy office at lunchtime for this place of refuge on the 30th floor of a nearby office tower. The upper room is the brainchild of Suzanne Morgan, a successful real estate developer and strong believer in centering prayer.
I'd like to provide a place for Chicago's busy working people to get a little relief from their stress during the day.
She underwrites the cost of the facility, which has attracted a steady following of business people since opening its doors just over a year ago.
It gives me a place to relax, to be real, to get nourished, and to bring it back for the rest of the day and the rest of the week.
Wayne Teasdale, meanwhile, is writing a book on the sacredness of work, the proper role of money, and the use of time.
We need to remind ourselves frequently of the value and preciousness of time.
Teasdale offers some practical tips on how to live a more contemplative life.
St. Benedict, in his rule for monks, says, treat all the utensils as sacred vessels of the altar. Everything that you use, you treat with respect.
And he recommends carving out a time for a meditative walk each day.
Being in the world, in the city, is a good place for a hermit, to be right at the heart of what is making this civilization tick, in order to communicate the value of contemplation in that situation. And it's not that I'm trying to prove this, I'm trying to live it.
For Religion and Ethics News Weekly, I'm Judy Valente in Chicago.
Finally, two items from overseas.